Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to see how this setup works. There's always like some new detail on these lives. And yeah, so today this is just going to be a little bit of like a bite-sized, kind of like a teaser book review. As always, I'm partway through the book and I'm going to write more of a full-length review for my Substack. But this is just to give you guys a little bit of a teaser, and then you can figure out if you're interested in this book or not. So I'm hoping my recording started on time. I think I might have a visual delay, which is strange. So this, again, let's get started here. This is about very interesting. If you can see this better here, this is a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon who has done a lot of really interesting work. Like, he's worked with the Dalai Lama. You may know his previous book, I was not aware of it, Into the Magic Shop. And so this is purportedly about what we need to know for the neuroscience of manifestation. Now, there's a lot of really interesting details in here. I will say I was very impressed, like, right away. The author has a very interesting story. Hey, Concern, thank you. Very interesting background, So this is kind of a classic case of, someone who had it all, lost it all, and had to like re-manifest everything. So he's really done everything in this book like twice, as it were. And he has a really interesting backstory of kind of like a healer he met when he was really young. So that's kind of like providing the narrative framework, because she taught him apparently a lot of these cognitive techniques, reframing techniques that he actually used to get himself out of poverty. He was in an extreme poverty situation, really like wealthy, super wealthy, and then lost it all again. Very interesting story, because it wasn't built on a proper foundation. Hey, everyone joining, thanks. Give this a like, drop an emoji once you're here. That'll help. So glad to see you guys. So yeah, so I'm just going to give kind of like a brief overview. And again, the full article is going to be on my Substack a bit later. And to give you guys time to discuss this and see if you also want to read this. So we'll see how we do, because I don't want to get bogged into too many of the details. And I might as well just say now, like, I'm not 100% convinced that we need all of this neuroscience to really enhance or learn like processes of manifestation. I think it's a little bit like maybe knowing the details of the engine of your car. So most of the time, you don't really need to know anything about that to go from A to B, right? In some cases, you very well might, but that's one way of looking at this. Another way of looking at this is, imagine you're looking out a window at a beautiful view, and the window is maybe like a little bit foggy, or there's a little bit of dirt or something. You're still looking at this beautiful view. You can still see what's out the window, but maybe some of these details can kind of help like clear the window, clarify it, and just kind of like sharpen the picture, sharpen your understanding of how manifestation might work, or really reframing what it actually is. So in that sense, these details are really useful, but we'll see, like as I finish the book, we'll see what is actually like actionable in terms of like need to know for actually doing these. So let's just start with, like, of course, since he's a scientist, he's got like an operational definition of manifestation. And for him, he's defining this as defining an intention such that it gets embedded into our subconscious. And by doing so, we activate brain networks associated with goal orientation that make an intention important, salient, and so that brain mechanisms are basically continuing to work on this like around the clock. So your subconscious is working on this. Nothing too revolutionary here. We already have an implicit understanding of that. But he makes some interesting points along the way. As I said, the details and what he really wants to emphasize given what he's learned neurophysiologically, neuroscientifically. So, for example, a key point is what we're doing with our attention. So he emphasizes that the real driver or the real engines of manifestation is not really desire, like we experience it that way, but that's not what actually drives the process. It's really more about like what we're doing with the direction and the scope and the quality or depth of our attention, our focus, basically. And a key point here is that it shouldn't be focused so much on the external. So we often think about manifesting that way, right? Like we want to manifest specific circumstances in the physical. And I think one of the key takeaways here is that he's really trying to like pull that focus back inward so that what we're actually doing is really we're manifesting a new nervous system state. And that's probably like the core of what is going to be really actionable here that we want to take away in terms of like, what are we doing with our nervous systems when we think we're in a process of manifestation, which technically we always are, because we've always got certain codes and patterns and programs that we have already embedded in our subconscious, basically. So we're kind of already manifesting that anyway. So this is about becoming very conscious of what those patterns are and, consciously curating that process, basically. And when you think about that, in that sense, manifestation is absolutely not like a woo-woo crazy new age kind of topic. So anyone in the chat, just you can jump in anytime if you have questions, if you want me to like pause and like clarify anything, just go for it. Thanks for joining. Great to see you guys. So yeah, let's go on here. So he also emphasizes, again, the same mind that creates the obstacles in your life is also the source of the intention that can bring in what you actually want to activate and manifest. So again, this is the power of our mind. And importantly, not in a sense that, you're trying to like create a fictitious reality, like you're trying to actively, believe that a different set of facts are in place, for example. But this is more about like bringing in your felt sense of where the agency of control is and like bringing it into the circle of what you actually have control over, where you can actually place your attention. You want those to align for in this context. And just basically to really no longer be very like indiscriminate with what you're doing with your attention, because that is an energetic exchange. You are not just like directing your attention, but it's a two-way process, right? Depending on what you focus on, it's not just input, it's also output and vice versa. So let's continue here. I had to make a bunch of notes and I'm going to do it differently for next time because this setup is, I need to improve my setup here. So basically, manifestation is this process of what he calls dispositional optimism, as I said. And so this is really a practice of possibility. It's the practice of believing in possibility, and in the sense, again, not for creating something fictitious, not like adjusting facts, so to speak. We don't want to get hung up on that, but this is more about getting into a state that enables us to create nervous system change, because that's like the foundation for the type of projections and expectations and repatterning that we can do that can bring us closer to what we want. So again, so we're moving back from the external to the internal locus of control. And he does have some interesting sections in here tracing the discussion of manifestation back to the Upanishads, to Buddha. Ostensibly, he has a quotation from Buddha who says that whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. So there you can see the importance on the quality of your attention, and that's something that you can actually cultivate. And I like that he uses the word inclination, because it does get at, if you know phenomenology, it gets at the state and quality of intentionality. And this is kind of like a fascinating insight that I came onto, because in the classical study of phenomenology, you will understand that consciousness has been characterized as kind of like intentional dispositions, which means, and you always learn that this isn't the same as like having an intention, like having a plan to do such and such tomorrow. But there is actually a very common ground here, a common root actually to intentionality. And it's related to this kind of inclination, because what does it mean to incline, right? It means you're like leaning forward, you're leaning in. And what you're leaning into is like the set of expectations, like the whole framework that you have constructed for your future, for literally, we're always projecting, right? We project a past, we project a future. Projection in and of itself isn't like, it doesn't mean that's false or like you're not supposed to. You're just supposed to become very aware of the schemas that you're using to enable like your own understanding of temporality and agency, basically. So that was a little side note. But in addition to all of that, obviously he is linking this with neuroplasticity. So this is all about the ability to change. And when we do, we are literally creating changes in our brain, in our neuronal structures, and more, right? This is not just about what the neurons are doing. This is not just about like having defined networks. There's a lot more going on that we still don't know about. Right. So those are some of the basics. What else is in here? So a lot of common knowledge that we're already familiar with, right? Like releasing expectations around the details and the timing of how manifestation can happen. And he goes into some more like nitty gritty things that maybe I don't think that they're as interesting. They're kind of a bit more like, now they feel very like computer science-ish. The brain does value tagging, which is how we kind of assign importance to specific goals or outcomes that we have a desire for. And that's kind of a process for how we really embed this subconsciously, so that our implicit cognition is like working on this around the clock. And he also discusses, for example, keeping a really open-hearted engagement with the world while we are, constantly, really, we're always manifesting, right? This isn't just, you're sitting down for like a session and you do some manifesting, right? We're always manifesting. So what this really comes down to so far, maybe I'm a quarter to 1/3 of the way through the book. It's about paying attention to your nervous system. And specifically, of course, this is all about the parasympathetic nervous system. You can't be in, neurologically speaking, you can't be in a continual survival mode and then manifest, the blessings, the things that you want, like the abundant states, because foundationally, they need to be neurological states first. So that's what I'm getting as the basis of his argument. So let's just see. How does one figure out what your subconscious manifestations are? How do you become aware of them? Right. So you're always manifesting on that level anyway, right? If you're not aware of it. And so this is actually part of one exercise I was going to give you guys, which is to really study. As we said, you've already been manifesting to some degree, everything in your life. Largely, a lot of it was circumstantial, especially when you were very, very, very young. But as we age, the longer we've been here in 3D, we get to know the patterns, we get to know our own conditioning, and then we have more control over that. So I would say it's a practice of studying what you've already manifested. And let me just share that now, since this is a good point. So one exercise you can do is to really, again, think about what you've already manifested. You may have some specific stories, and try to study these so that you can come to an understanding of like what your pattern was for doing that, because I'm very convinced that we each have very specific styles of bringing things in, basically of matching ourselves to certain external conditions. And so I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but the quick answer is, study what you've already manifested. And if it doesn't feel like, maybe you forget, if there's a really specific positive story, you can go back to, maybe there were specific like negative circumstances that, we don't want to think that we manifested those in that way, but you get what I mean, right? Like, just study your patterns. I'm sure there's at least one or two life memories that you have where something was just way more specific. It was just really calling out to you, and you can remember it, and just try to see like if there's any kind of through line, like a connection. But I'm going to come back to this process, this little exercise at the end. So, right, let's just look at really quickly. He has 6 steps that he outlines here. And this is kind of a process that he goes into. So there's like 8 chapters in the book, and 6 of these chapters, each one is devoted to one of these steps. And again, most of them, you've heard them before, I think. So this isn't like groundbreaking on the surface, but number 1 is about the power of the focus of your attention, right? Consciously curating your attentional feed, so to speak. We may like that metaphor now because of social media. We really understand the concept of having a feed. And so we're always engaging with a specific attentional feed as well, right? It's not just when we're scrolling, it's our whole life. Number 2 is just really clarifying what exactly you want, like what exactly is your desire. Now, I find this step is really interesting because I think we assume, well, this is really obvious, right? Like, I want to be wealthy. I need a lot of financial abundance. But to actually clarify it in a very holistic context, all the details, right? The whole picture, that's actually like a very specific task. And I think that you also need to practice that, because there's a lot of ways we kind of just keep it really vague. Number 3 is to remove obstacles in the mind. So this is your limiting beliefs. This is like past conditioning, like traumatic histories that you may have that become embedded in memory, so that a given event or something may produce a trigger, and then you kind of like stop in your tracks. So all of these kinds of obstacles and ways that we get stuck. Number 4 is to embed the intention in our subconscious. So this is a lot of visualization exercises we can do, mindset shifts. Number 5 is to pursue the goal passionately. This is one like I feel very in touch with, because I know that when I look on my life, there's a lot of, well, how do I say this? Some of the most dramatic cases of manifestation have absolutely come through periods where I was engaged in very, very inspired action. So that's what this is all about. Like, so whether this is like you're in a flow state, sure, but you're also aiming at a very specific goal with high energy, no expectations, but it's about the quality of energy that you're like projecting and exchanging, basically. And number 6 is to let go of attachment to the outcome. And another way to think of this, again, is what you're doing with your attention, right? So you're not, once you get that clarity, you want to kind of like release it and step back. And then you're kind of like more focused on the energy of doing, of being, rather than trying to like match certain conditions or something, which actually like constricts the possibilities. So there's other possibilities for attaining this that you can't really imagine or access yet. So those are his 6 steps, and I haven't gone through all of his discussion on those, but it seems pretty straightforward. So, just a really quick overview of the book. Basically, there are some really great manifestation stories in here. Again, starting with his own, I find these just fascinating in themselves, right? These biographical details, and some of his students, of course, too. And he's got a lot of really good visualization exercises at the ends of each chapter, which is great because they're focused on the inner work of manifestation, right? They're not like vision board types of techniques, but as I said, helping you understand like your own manifestation history, so to speak. What else? So now let's just get into the part where I feel I'm convinced, but I mean, I'm not in a super strong way that like how much of the neuroscience we really need to know. Again, it's helpful. It's super interesting. Trust, I've studied it. I love it. But again, in terms of like getting from A to B, how much of this do we actually need to know for our practice? And the point about the parasympathetic nervous system is obviously core, right? That's important to know. We can't do any of this in states of, what's the word I want to use here? Dysphoric states, right? Whether this is like heavy trauma or if it's just negative thinking, limiting beliefs, just basic tension, stress in the body, these will all activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight flight network. And what is really interesting here, he covers like the 4 large scale networks in the brain. And so the default mode network, the salience network, the attention network, and the central executive network. And his argument rather, is that they work together as a kind of ecosystem, very similar to the way to endocrinology, right? Like the way our hormones work together, like there's an order to how they fluctuate, and same with neurotransmitters. And the key point is that if your sympathetic nervous system is overactivated for whatever reason, it just throws the whole thing out of balance. Like these networks literally on like a neurological level they're not in harmony. They're not in coherence anymore. They're actually creating dysfunction. So, I mean, that may be enough on its own. Like this is a really big point to make. So you need to have the parasympathetic nervous system in control. So this is why you want to do your meditation, why you want to, again, control your attention, not just externally, right? But like, what are you doing internally? What thoughts are you allowing yourself to entertain? What voices are you allowing yourself to interplay, like replay? This all contributes to your internal stress response. Because once you have cortisol elevated for whatever reason, like it sets off the whole dynamic. And importantly, that's when you can't access, imagination or deep memory or the subconscious, all of these, which are needed for the constant goal-seeking, energetic matching processes to work, if that's making sense. Are you guys following this so far? So that is interesting. It is interesting. But it kind of feels like a reminder, right? It's a really good reminder, right? This is all about the parasympathetic nervous system. And what I find always really most fascinating in neuroscience is really like comparative, like evolutionary neuroscience, right? We have the same nervous system as, most primates. Between the chimpanzee and Homo sapien is a difference of like 1 millimeter of the neocortex, basically. Like we just have that 1 extra millimeter. And the autonomic nervous system has also evolved in a very specific order, a very specific progression, right? It's not like different between, birds and lizards and humans. The autonomic nervous system is like part of the vagus nerve, which is basically, it's the brainstem. So it's one of the oldest parts of the nervous system, right? So this is the sense in which we can think of the nervous system as a kind of biotechnology, literally. And the one interesting point that he emphasizes is that the sympathetic nervous system is actually older evolutionarily than the parasympathetic nervous system. So survival responses, threat responses obviously came first, right? Is something going to eat me? Do I have to run? Right? Of course, that came first. And only after perhaps, evolving a shell for safety, then, the parasympathetic nervous system can evolve and you can like rest and digest literally. And that's when you have time to engage and grow these more subtle networks like the default mode network, which is basically, I like to think of it as like the daydreaming network. It takes over when we're not really focused on a very specific task, a specific goal. So in and of itself, like, again, that's all super, super interesting. But the key point that he comes back to is just keeping the parasympathetic nervous system like really healthy. I think he talks about this as the green zone of what you're doing with your vagus nerve, which again is the brainstem. Who would have thought, right? The brainstem, right? We put so much focus on, oh, we're so special. Look at our prefrontal cortex. Look at like the amygdala even, but it's like, no, this is just like, we're getting into the brainstem. This is the basics. So that's all pretty cool. And I'm going to continue looking at like the last 5 chapters, but let me know what you guys think so far. You can also drop this in the comments when you watch this on the replay. But basically, this is that's what I would leave you with basically, is like the emphasis on really just getting yourself out of survival mode. And that doesn't mean like we may think of that as like material conditions, which is part of it, of course. Like maybe you aren't in the financial circumstance you want, all of these external things. That's okay. Like you start this manifestation process internally, right? So getting out of survival mode on a neurological level first. And so you want to do your meditation practices, whatever self-care practices really like help you activate and the parasympathetic, so that you are in these states rather than like just constant elevated cortisol, right? So, and I think that really like makes a really nice bridge with what is already like such common knowledge. But basically, yeah, I just wanted to leave you guys with like 2 exercises that you can do. I touched on one of them, but the first one is to really go back to this switch from the external to internal practices of manifestation. Because again, what you want to do first is you're manifesting a new neurological template first, right? Getting yourself into these super relaxed states. And so think about like what kinds of internal states you would like to manifest for yourself. For example, having a more kind and compassionate and non-judgmental relationship with yourself, or upgrading your belief system so that you have more of a bias for positive outcomes. And again, just being very cognizant of the kinds of patterns that you use there. How are you projecting certain expectations? We're always projecting, right? So that would be the first exercise I would encourage you guys to do, this switch from the external to the internal. And yeah, and then the next one is really about learning and studying and identifying your styles and patterns for manifestation. Again, you've already done this historically, like for most of your life. You have either, learn your processes, right? Like, have you done very specific logical things to manifest certain circumstances or people, opportunities, also to engage in therapy if desired. Yes. So identifying our patterns and your styles of manifestation. So here, this is what I find interesting about the topic of manifestation, because I think it's actually like a hazily defined way of talking about the phenomenon. I think there's a few other components that are like working together here, and we're not really on the right level. This is a very effective level. It's kind of like the way we talk about the matrix, right? It's an effective model for what we want to talk about and mean, but there's just other components that are also working in manifestation, and I just feel like we don't totally have that clarified yet. The role of intuition, the role of synchronicities, and how the universe also speaks to you. So this is getting a little bit more detailed. This is now getting into more of like some of my own theories, but I think that you can really work on identifying like what I call like, what cognitive metaphors do you really use? Like what cognitive metaphors are very activated for you, and they kind of like shape the language that the universe will speak to you through. So it's probably also just very related to your own specific interests. So for example, if you are like an athlete or a huge sports fan, maybe it's hockey. I know someone who has very specific dreams about hockey, like about the way that you score the goal, different things that the players are doing. And these really always correlate to very specific interpretations, like kind of like predictions for what they're supposed to look out for or avoid. So you also probably have one or two really strong cognitive schemas like this based on something you're super interested in, or maybe it's like a gift you have, like an innate talent somewhere. For me, metaphors of like photography and dialogue are huge, and they do kind of correlate with my gifts too. So it makes sense. Also books. I get a lot of like synchronicities and signs through patterns that I find in like connections between what I'm reading about and what I'm doing in life. And actually, it even happened with this book. This is funny because I was gifted this, and the timing, it worked out that, so you guys have all seen the famous like John Hamm meme on social, on Instagram. And of course, what's on page 10, 20 of this book, he has spoken with John Hamm. He was working with him on a possible adaptation of his first book. So I was reading this at the same time, and that's just like a simple, fun kind of synchronicity, but I get a lot of them. So I will be reading about a specific date in a book on the actual date. If it was like August 31st and then today's August 31st, I get that a lot. Also names, a lot of different types of synchronicities. So my point is, find out what kind of categories and schemas really work for you. Again, maybe you're like really into cars, or it's sports, or something that like so much about. That's probably going to serve as like this kind of backdrop cognitive schema that the universe will use as kind of language to communicate with you. And this plays a role in how we manifest, how we kind of like match ourselves into, new energetic states, new templates, and so on. So I'm gonna start to wrap it up here, but any questions, you can type these in. Thanks to everyone who's been joining. I think a few have been coming and going, but you can like catch this on the replay. Again, I'm going to have a full review. It's going to go on my Substack. And, I'm trying to like build the interest in running kind of more of this study group on very specific texts like this. So when there's a lot of interest, as more of you come in here, I can do a more in-depth kind of more of even like a lecture style video on some of these books that are very worth it. So these are the little sketches though. So I hope you found something interesting in here. Thanks again, Concern, for joining. Really glad to have you back here. And yeah, your question, if psychic, yes, I've been trying to like sort of share more about that in some of my recent videos. It's difficult to talk about, not because it's like difficult, but you can look at some of my recent shorts, but I've been talking about having like clairlingual gifts. We hear a lot about like clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance, and I'm just adding how did I say clairlinguistic, clairlingual. But this is a type of knowing that goes beyond, just your immediate senses, or it's a very specific channel. I might say. I also include, I consider myself clairesthetic. So I get very specific kinds of like impressions and energy reads based on aesthetic details, but also very specifically visual artworks. And it really comes out interestingly on digital for some reason, through digital screens. There's something about maybe the distance. But I can pick up on a lot of energy through those kinds of images, and, obviously in person as well, but definitely through language, definitely through any kind of dialogue. Again, that's kind of a cognitive metaphor for me. And yeah, but it's interesting, and I'm still a little bit new to like really parsing out how that works for me. But I've just found that it explains more than it sounds obscure or vague. So yeah, thanks for asking about that. I definitely want to like work to continue to clarify that. Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. So I'm going to wrap it up here for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, drop a comment if you have picked up this book, or if you think you might, or, you can wait. I'm going to do an extended review on Substack as I go through the last chapters, and I'll let you know what else is like actually actionable in here versus just a lot more, like so many super interesting details, of course, on the neurological level. But okay. So thanks for tuning in, you guys. And I'll see you next time.